Today, we're diving into a massive crisis that affects pretty much everyone, yet it's still sort of whispered about behind closed doors, or honestly just ignored entirely until things hit a breaking point. We're tackling the critical issue of mental health in the workplace. And our main goal today, we really want to completely flip the script on how we view this. We need to stop seeing mental health as just this purely private, individual struggle that people have to deal with on their own time, and start recognizing it for what it truly is, a shared, critical, organizational responsibility. The research we're unpacking today is going to show us exactly why that mindset shift is absolutely crucial, and more importantly, how we can actually make it happen. $1 trillion. That is not the GDP of some small nation. That staggering figure is actually the World Health Organization's estimate for the annual global economic cost of depression and anxiety. Let that sink in for a second. $1 trillion every single year. So right off the bat, this establishes that workplace mental health isn't just some nice-to-have, fluffy wellness initiative. No way. This is a massive bottom-line business issue. And the crazy part? Most of these financial losses aren't even from direct healthcare expenses. They are almost entirely driven by a massive drop in productivity.
So I really want you to ask yourself honestly, is your workplace treating the symptoms or totally ignoring the disease? Are managers just reflexively disciplining people for missing a deadline, or are they taking a step back to figure out why a formerly rockstar employee is suddenly dropping the ball? As we go through all this data, I really want you to reflect on your own daily work environment. Let's take that abstract trillion-dollar figure and make it deeply personal.
To put things into perspective, the WHO estimates that 12 billion working days are lost globally every single year due to unmanaged psychological challenges. 12 billion. When employees are completely burned out, dealing with chronic stress, or just drowning in digital overwhelm, they might be physically absent, sure, but a lot of times they're experiencing what's known as presenteeism. That's when they are sitting right there at their desk, but they are completely drained and literally unable to perform. That is 12 billion days of lost human potential.
Okay, let's move into section 1, the top 5 warning signs.
Now, when employees are secretly struggling, they usually exhibit some pretty clear behavioral indicators on the ground. We're talking about persistent fatigue, withdrawal or isolation, a noticeable decline in performance, increased irritability, and a general sense of hopelessness or negativity. And look, these aren't just isolated bad days. These are systemic red flags that something deeper is wrong.
It's really key to understand the nuance of these 5 signs. For example, persistent fatigue isn't just, oh, I stayed up too late watching TV and need another coffee. It is a deep cognitive depletion where someone is drained even after resting. Then you have withdrawal. That happens when a super collaborative team member suddenly goes silent and starts eating lunch alone in their car. A decline in performance is pretty obvious. You'll see missed deadlines and way more errors than usual. Irritability often shows up as a remarkably short temper or just zero patience with coworkers. And finally, hopelessness. This is when an employee feels so overwhelmed they might actually say that their efforts simply don't matter anymore. Prolonged stress literally rewires behavior.
And these psychological red flags heavily overlap with physical symptoms too. Frequent headaches, trouble sleeping, they are often directly tied to the stress we just talked about. Now, a manager isn't a doctor. They might not be able to diagnose clinical depression, but they can absolutely spot when someone on their team is rubbing their temples with a headache every single afternoon, snapping at colleagues, or looking like they haven't slept in a week. These are very observable signals, and they are essentially begging for support. All right, let's make this concrete. Section 2, real-world retail scenarios. Let's imagine you've got employee A. They're a cashier, and they're showing persistent fatigue, irritability, and they're making a lot more scanning errors than usual. The real risk here is full-blown burnout and potential conflict with your customers. Now, the old-school way of managing this would just be to hand them a write-up for the errors, right? But an empathetic manager, they intervene with a private, supportive check-in. They assess the workload, maybe adjust break schedules, and definitely refer the employee to an employee assistance program, or EAP. It's all about adjusting the environment to help them succeed, not just punishing the behavior. Now consider employee B, a stock associate who suddenly starts withdrawing socially and calling out sick on your busiest days. The risk here shifts to severe job withdrawal and a total breakdown in team cohesion. So, what's the action plan? You need an immediate, totally non-disciplinary one-on-one conversation. As a manager, you have to combat that workplace isolation, maybe by pairing them up with a supportive peer mentor and just expressing genuine concern. You've got to bridge that gap before the employee completely disconnects from the job.
And finally, if a shift supervisor starts showing a sharp decline in performance alongside expressions of hopelessness, saying things out loud like, "Nothing I do here even matters anymore," that is a major red flag. It points to severe burnout and depressive symptoms, which can actually lead to real safety risks on the floor. This scenario requires immediate, empathetic intervention. A manager must temporarily redistribute their high-stakes responsibilities and quickly bring in HR and occupational health support. This is exactly where a company's duty of care becomes absolutely vital. So, how do we actually fix this? Section 3, the Empathy Intervention Toolkit. We have got to completely abandon that outdated, punitive management style of just punishing absenteeism and penalizing a drop in performance. Instead, the modern, highly effective approach is to seek out the root cause and offer compassionate, flexible support. It's about treating the employee as a whole human being. We have to recognize that a sudden drop in performance is almost always a symptom of a much larger stressor, not just a sudden loss of talent or skill. And if you look at recent survey data from working adults, there is a massive consensus right now. Words like support, health, employee, and workplace are completely dominating the conversation. The data confirms what we've been saying. Open communication and proactive support are no longer just cute optional perks. They are non-negotiable expectations from the modern workforce. Actually, to put a human face to all this clinical research, consider survey respondent number 9. They said, "People won't always remember what you did for them, but they will always remember how you made them feel." That quote really anchors everything we are talking about today. When a manager steps in early and shows genuine empathy to someone who's struggling, it builds immense loyalty and retention. It literally transforms a sterile organizational policy into a genuine human connection. Okay, so how do we operationalize that feeling? Well, it starts with implementing flexible work arrangements to help reduce daily friction. Next, having robust employee assistance programs ensures that professional help is always just a phone call away. We also need to normalize non-disciplinary wellness check-ins. Just sitting down and asking, "Hey, how are you doing?" without tying it to a performance review. Couple that with actually training managers to spot those 5 warning signs we discussed earlier. All of these steps work together to foster an open culture that completely removes the stigma of raising your hand and saying, "Hey, I'm overwhelmed." So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Are you just managing your team, or are you actually supporting them? Because management is just about tracking tasks and hitting deadlines, but support is about recognizing the human being executing those tasks. Taking mental health seriously isn't just about saving $1 trillion in lost productivity, though, yeah, it totally will do that. It's about creating a resilient, compassionate workplace where people actually want to show up every day. I challenge you to take this empathy toolkit back to your own workplace tomorrow.